As representatives of UN command members gather in Seoul and jointly declare to stay united against any hostility that challenges the security of South Korea. In the run-up to the APEC summit in San Francisco this week, South Korean President Yoon says he'll seek joint actions with world leaders against illicit military cooperation between North Korea and Russia. Also on his mind, diversifying supply chains and expanding trade. Hamas has reportedly proposed to exchange hostages for a ceasefire, while the Israeli defense minister says Hamas has lost control of Gaza. It's November 14, 2023. This is News Center. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. I'm Yoon Jung-min. We start with international efforts to maintain stability on the Korean Peninsula. South Korea and the defense ministers and representatives from all the UN command member states initiated their meeting in Seoul and jointly declared to stay united against any hostility or attack challenging the security of South Korea. Defense correspondent Choi Min-jung reports.
South Korea and the UN command member states have vowed unity against challenges posed on the Korean Peninsula. In a joint statement following the inaugural defense ministerial meeting on Tuesday, defense ministers and representatives declared that they will be united upon any renewal of hostilities or an armed attack on the Korean Peninsula, challenging the principles of the UN and the security of South Korea. The member states reaffirmed that the promise and spirit of the 1953 Armistice Agreement continues to be necessary for the protection of peace and democracy on the Korean Peninsula today, as it was in the past. In a written congratulatory message during the meeting, President Yoon stressed that the UNC is a strong source of power in the defense of South Korea. Meanwhile, Defense Minister Shin Won-sik sent a strong warning to North Korea.
This is a warning to North Korea. Unlike during the Korean War, North Korea is now a member of the UN. Therefore, if it illicitly invades South Korea again, it will be attacking the UNC, a self-contradicting move for a UN member state.
Shin added that Pyongyang's provocations are bound to be followed by strong punishment from the international community centered on the UNC. He also stressed that countries that help North Korea will receive the same punishment. This was echoed by the U.S. Defense Secretary, who expressed deep concerns about the recent growth in military cooperation between North Korea and Russia.
The DPRK is providing lethal aid to Russia to fuel Putin's cruel war of choice against Ukraine. And Russia is providing more support for the DPRK's wide-ranging illicit activities. Now, these activities do not just threaten the ROK, they also erode the rules-based international order that has brought prosperity and peace for the past 70 years.
South Korea on Tuesday hosted the first ever defense ministerial meeting with UNC member states. Defense ministers and representatives of 17 UNC members attended the meeting. The UNC was set up in 1950 to support South Korea against North Korea and now oversees the Korean War Armistice. It consists of 17 member states that protected South Korea from armed aggression during the Korean War and fought under one flag to restore international peace. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
The South Korean government has been mulling over suspending the September 19th Inter-Korean Military Agreement, also known as the Comprehensive Military Agreement, citing North Korea's aggression. And now we're learning that some of the clauses could be suspended if North Korea launches a reconnaissance satellite, which is deemed imminent. Kim Jong-sil reports.
The South Korean government is reportedly considering suspending some clauses in the September 19 Inter-Korean Military Agreement if North Korea launches a reconnaissance satellite. Citing a senior government official, Yonhap News reported on Tuesday that a possible lifting of regulations in the CMA governing aerial reconnaissance in areas along the military demarcation line will be discussed, meaning South Korea could resume these operations that are currently prohibited within 25 kilometers from the MDL. An official at the Ministry of Unification also told reporters the same day that the ministry will closely monitor North Korea's moves and comprehensively review necessary measures, while not specifying or clarifying what has been discussed regarding the suspension of the agreement. The official added that the ministry will closely communicate with the Ministry of National Defense, which is in charge of this issue. The comment comes amid recently appointed Defense Minister Shin Won-sik's strong remarks that the CMA severely limits South Korea's real-time monitoring capabilities in the no-fly zone of North Korean provocations. Both South and North Korea agreed in 2018 to cease hostilities on land, sea, and air and establish buffer zones. The agreement prohibits unmanned aerial vehicles from being flown within 10 kilometers of the MDL in western regions and 15 kilometers in eastern areas. Regarding satellite launches, North Korea had announced that it would launch one in October, but this has been delayed. The launch would be Pyongyang's third attempt to put a reconnaissance satellite in orbit. Pundits say it's possible one could be launched around November 18th, which is the country's newly designated Missile Industry Day. Kim Jong-sil, Arirang News.
Tomorrow, President Yoon Suk-yeol will be leaving for APEC summit in San Francisco. And when he comes back, he'll only have one full day before he leaves for London and Paris. In the run-up to these events, the president says he'll be discussing ways to diversify supply chains and expand trade while seeking joint actions with APEC leaders against illicit military cooperation between North Korea and Russia. Kim Do-yeon has the latest.
With a series of overseas trips starting in just a day, President Yoon Suk-yeol emphasized how important they are as he spoke on Tuesday to open a cabinet meeting. First up is the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit in San Francisco.
저는 세계 GDP의 60% 이상을 차지하는 회원국의 정상들이 한데 모이는 이번 회의에서 공급망 다변화와 무역 투자 확대와 같이 우리 경제에 실질적으로 보탬이 되는 협력 방안을 논의할 것입니다.
He also spoke on his state visit to the United Kingdom as he will be returning to Seoul from San Francisco for just one day before departing for London. The South Korea-UK Accord, which already has been announced, will be a key part of the trip and is set to enhance bilateral cooperation going forward.
영국은 유럽의 제2위의 경제 대국임에도 불구하고 우리나라와의 무역 규모는 독일, 이탈리아와의 무역 규모에 미치지 못합니다.
Also, after London, he's set to stop by Paris before returning home. This trip is just days before the Bureau International des Expositions vote on who will host the World Expo 2030 and is set to meet with the voting representatives through an event to deliver his last persuasions on behalf of Busan. In the meantime, President Yoon's interview with the Associated Press was released on the same day, and the written interview highlighted the security aspect of his APEC trip. According to AP, he, quote, slammed the arms exchanges between North Korea and Russia and said he will bring this up during APEC to emphasize what it really means to global security. He said that current global challenges arising from the war in Ukraine, the Israel-Hamas conflict, the climate crisis, and high inflation offer an opportunity for APEC to demonstrate its leadership again by spearheading efforts to overcome crises and to spur innovation through regional cooperation. He also said to AP, reinforced countermeasures are needed if North Korea's nuclear and missile technology continues to grow, criticizing the regime's apparent weapons cooperation with Russia. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
Top diplomats of South Korea, the U.S. and Japan are set to meet in San Francisco on the sidelines of the APEC summit this week. Seoul's foreign ministry says Foreign Minister Park Jin will sit down for talks on Tuesday local time with his U.S. and Japanese counterparts, Antony Blinken and Yoko Kamikawa. They are expected to address the growing concerns on military cooperation between North Korea and Russia, as Pyongyang is believed to have provided Moscow with weapons in exchange for technology for its nuclear and missile programs. The situation in the Middle East and economic cooperation between the three countries are also likely to be on the agenda. Also in San Francisco, this week's high-stakes meeting between the leaders of the U.S. and China on the margins of the APEC summit is expected to restore bilateral military communication channels. And China may resume purchases of a U.S. plane maker Boeing's aircraft as a sign of improvement in bilateral relations. Pei Yun-ji has more on what to expect.
U.S. President Joe Biden and Chinese President Xi Jinping are expected to agree on the partial reopening of military-to-military communication channels during their meeting this week. Citing an unnamed source, Kyodo News reported on Tuesday that Biden is set to request a move and Xi is poised to accept, given that senior Chinese military officials have also supported the idea, as part of efforts to prevent miscalculations and reduce the risk of any inadvertent clashes. In a press briefing on Monday local time, the White House National Security Advisor also expressed hopes, saying China's dialogue on this issue has been constructive.
Having our two militaries in communication is the way you reduce mistake, you avoid escalation, you manage competition so it doesn't veer into conflict.
Earlier on Sunday, the senior White House official also said this issue of resuming military communication has been a priority for Biden. Beijing cut off military-to-military communications with Washington last year, after then U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi visited Taiwan. Relations between the two countries escalated further in February, when the U.S. shot down a suspected Chinese spy balloon that flew over its territory. Also, the meeting between the two presidents is expected to lead to a sales breakthrough for a U.S. plane maker. As a report says, China may resume purchases of Boeing's best-selling 737 MAX aircraft, ending a long commercial freeze of more than 4 years. Bloomberg reported that the Chinese government is considering unveiling a commitment for the aircraft when Biden and Xi meet this week, as a signal of a recent thawing between the two countries. Deliveries of Boeing 737 MAX to Chinese airlines were halted, and the company has not made any significant sales of the aircraft following two deadly crashes in October 2018 and March 2019 that killed almost 350 people. Pei Yun-ji, Arirang News.
Findings for the month of October show that the country's ICT sector is slowly but surely showing signs of recovery after more than a year of falling exports. What was worth noticing? A turnaround in memory chip exports. Moon Hae-ryun has more.
South Korea's tech exports recorded their smallest on-year decline of 2023 on the back of rising outbound shipments of memory chips. Data released by the Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy on Tuesday shows that ICT exports for October came to just over $17 billion. While this is 4.5% less than the amount recorded the same month the year before and marks an on-year decline for 16 months straight, this is the lowest decline recorded so far this year. The ministry attributed the slowing drop to the turnaround in memory chip exports, which had seen a downturn since last July. Memory chip exports in October came to just over $4.5 billion, a 1% increase in value on year as the average unit prices of DRAM and NAND flash chips have risen. It's the first time that memory chip exports, one of the country's main tech export sectors, have seen a rise in 16 months. The display sector also saw a 13% increase, coming to just under $2.3 billion, showing a consecutive incline for 3 months as mobile OLED display exports saw a rise. However, the mobile industry as a whole saw a drop of over 3% as global demand weakened, other than the premium smartphone sector, which saw a rise in exports to the US for 5 months straight. Exports of computers and telecommunication devices also fell on year by over 26% and 23% respectively, as the global economic slowdown has led to a drop in investments in infrastructure for these sectors. By country, South Korea's tech exports saw an increase in shipments to Vietnam, but a slump in shipments to China, the United States, the European Union and Japan. China is the country's biggest destination for ICT exports, responsible for over 40%. In October, semiconductor exports saw an on-year rise for the first time in 16 months as the IT industry in China showed signs of recovery. And the overall on-year decline of tech exports recorded a single-digit drop for the first time since September last year. 문혜련, Arirang News.
President Yoon has urged the National Assembly to swiftly pass bills related to livelihoods issues, specifically those addressing the refurbishment of aging planned cities in the Seoul metropolitan area. During a cabinet meeting on Tuesday, Yoon emphasized the need for Parliament to expedite the special law within the year, saying it's crucial for improvements in residential environments and managing migration demands. The special act, introduced in March, outlines plans for the reconstruction and redevelopment of the nation's first-generation planned cities, including Pundong and Ilsan, located just outside Seoul. This issue was part of Yoon's presidential campaign and has been adopted as a national agenda by the Yoon administration. Over in the Middle East, Hamas has reportedly proposed a hostage swap for a temporary ceasefire deal, but whether or not Israel accepts this remains unclear. Meanwhile, the Israeli defense minister said that Hamas has lost control of Gaza. Shin Ha-young tells us more.
Hamas said on Monday local time that it was ready to release up to 70 women and children held in Gaza in return for a 5-day truce with Israel. In a message on Hamas's official Telegram channel, the group said the armistice should include a complete ceasefire and humanitarian aid for the Gaza Strip. This comes after Hamas previously halted hostage negotiations when Israeli operations closed in on the Dar al-Shifa hospital in Gaza City, leaving the medical complex with thousands of patients at breaking point without electricity and water and in need of vital aid. Thousands had to flee as gunfire and bombings continued outside its compound. The U.S. also emphasized that a ceasefire for several days was necessary for the release of the hostages.
And then ultimately, we'd like to see considerably longer pauses, days, not hours, in the context of a hostage release, and that's being actively worked on as well.
However, it remains uncertain whether Israel will accept this, as Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has already said there will be no ceasefire or supply of fuel into Gaza until the release of more than 200 hostages. Israel still considers Hamas as a target to destroy.
This is neither an operation nor a round, but a war to the end. This is not lip service, but from the heart and mind. If we do not finish them, it will come back.
Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant said Monday that Hamas had lost control over the Gaza Strip as residents no longer trusted the Hamas government. Gallant said that Israel's action in Gaza continued to destroy Hamas infrastructure and kill Hamas commanders, and that the terrorists were heading south, leading to success in the northern part of the Gaza Strip. Meanwhile, the Israel Defense Forces said they successfully took over the Palestinian Legislative Council building in Gaza, which has only served Hamas's lawmakers. An image circulating on social media shows IDF troops inside Gaza's parliament building after capturing the site. Shin Ha-young, Arirang News.
BTS member Jungkook has set yet another record as a K-pop solo artist. According to Billboard on Monday, Standing Next to You at the lead-off track from his album Golden has entered its Hot 100 chart at number 5. Jungkook is the first K-pop solo artist to have 6 songs charting on the Billboard Hot 100 and to see 3 enter the top 5 of the chart. Standing Next to You, the third in the top 5 this year, follows on from 7, which topped the chart, and 3D that also took the number 5 spot. The Billboard Hot 100 chart is based on streaming activity, generally making it more reflective of what's hot among listeners across the United States. In sports news, LG Twins won its first Korean series title in almost 3 decades Monday evening. Lee Seung-jae has highlights.
Top of the 9th inning, 2 outs with Bae Jung-dae at bat. The 2-2 pitch from LG Twins closer Ko Woo-seok led to a weak line drive to second baseman Shin Min-jae, who caught the 3rd and final out of the Korean series. The 6-2 win on Monday night at a sold-out Jamsil Baseball Stadium in Seoul meant that the LG Twins had finally clinched the long-awaited Korean Series title. It ended a 29-year title drought, one of the longest championship droughts in the KBL League. The 2023 regular season champions, who had a long break waiting for the KT Wiz to eventually advance to the Korean Series, looked rusty in Game 1, losing 3-2. However, it was the long balls that brought the Twins back on track, with several dramatic come-from-behind victories that helped the Seoul-based baseball team win their title. In Game 2, down 1-0, Park Dong-won's 2-run home run in the 8th inning helped the Twins win Game 2 to even the series. In Game 3, down by 2 runs in the 9th inning, it was the Korean Series MVP and LG Twins captain Oh Ji-hwan's 3-run home run that helped his team win 8-7 and take a 2-1 series lead. Oh Ji-hwan finished the Korean Series with 3 home runs and 8 runs batted in, while also becoming the first player to hit home runs in 3 straight games in the same Korean Series. The Korean Series win sent fans into a frenzy despite the frigid November weather, and they hope they won't have to wait another 29 years for the next championship title. 이승재, Arirang News.
Warmer spells are expected for tomorrow daytime, but wide temperature gaps will follow. Most regions will see a gap of more than 10 degrees in between day and night. For places like Andong, lows will be in the negative territory at -2 degrees, but highs will be jumping to 13 degrees Celsius. Drastic fluctuation in daily temperatures can easily lead to a cold, so make sure to dress warmly. With lows plunging significantly overnight, frost and ice may appear on the roads. Keep in mind that frost and freeze conditions can damage crops and other sensitive vegetation. It can also damage unprotected plumbing as well. Also, dry spells are persisting across the East Coast, along with gusty offshore winds. With low moisture levels in the air, the risk of fire remains high. Tomorrow, Seoul and Daegu will start off at 2 degrees, and Jeju will be warm at 11 degrees. As for the daily highs, Seoul will get up to 13 degrees, Daejeon and Gwangju 14, Daegu and Gyeongju will be reaching 15 degrees. On Thursday, which is the National College Entrance Exam Day, nationwide rain is in the forecast. For this weekend, clear skies will make a return. That's all for now, and here are the weather conditions around the world.
That is News Center for tonight. Thank you for watching. A panel session coming up.
한국에 오면 먹어야죠. 먹어도 끝이 없는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니? 웰컴. (24시간) 불이 꺼지지 않는 나라 감당할 수 있겠니? 웰컴. 엄청난 에너지를 춤으로 뿜어내는 나라 감당할 수 있겠니?
Presiding over Monday's cabinet meeting following his latest diplomatic agenda in New York, President Yoon
South Korea's economy will grow.
The central bank has kept its key interest rate unchanged.
Mission complete. Foreign rocket duty selfish.
Seoul is rallying in hopes of bringing the World Expo 2030.
Arirang. Korea hydro and nuclear power envisions a world flowing with energy as clean as the blue skies, where we can enjoy energy without worrying about the planet by finding new alternative sources to achieve carbon neutrality through clean, carbon-free energy. KHNP is creating a new future for a carbon-free world. Korea hydro and nuclear power.
한국에 오면 먹어야죠. 먹어도 끝이 없는 나라 감당할 수 있겠니? 웰컴. 엄청난 에너지를 춤으로 뿜어내는 나라 감당할 수 있겠니?
Hello everyone, it's Tuesday and you're watching Within the Frame. I'm Kim Bo-kyung.
South Korea is suffering from a chronic doctor shortage, especially in essential departments and regional areas outside the capital. Such a shortage is expected to further escalate as the country is in the process of becoming a super-aged society with a low birth rate. Thus, the Yoon administration is seeking to increase the overall medical school quota starting in 2025, which has been capped at 3,058 since 2006. However, doctors say just increasing their numbers will not help unless pay for work in unpopular but essential medical fields is improved, and advantages are given to those practicing medicine in rural areas. How serious is the shortage issue, and how should the discussion develop? For this, we invited Dr. Alice Tan, an internist at Miss Many Women's Hospital. Welcome, Dr. Tan.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being with us. And we also have Professor Son Ho-jun from Seoul National University. Good to see you again, Professor Son.
Good to be back.
Good evening. All right, first question to our Dr. Tan. Let's first casually talk about how popular doctor is as a job in South Korea. Soon, the Suneung, or Korea's College Scholastic Ability Test, will be held. And among the 500,000 students, more than 30% are so-called ensuseng, which means they have already taken this test. And one of the reasons for the retake is because many students prefer medical school. How do you see such a trend?
You know, I think everyone can agree that we all benefit when our medical workforce is composed of people who are the brightest of the bright, but also dedicated, empathetic, able to work well in a team. You know, they're collaborative people, they're creative. That's the kind of workforce that we want working in the field of medicine. We do not necessarily need to fill the medical workforce with people who are the best test takers. And unfortunately, this Suneung system favors this latter category of people who are merely, say, good test takers are the ones who are sort of shunted into the medical field. I think it's an unfortunate way of using potentially wonderful resources in terms of time, energy, and manpower for students to be spending one extra year, sometimes several years, just studying for this one test. I would understand if there's a handful of students who are retaking the test because of extenuating circumstances, but this system doesn't quite seem to make sense, and perhaps we need to rethink the medical school admissions process so that we are selecting students based on a more comprehensive set of qualities, not just scoring high on the Suneung test.
Right. Well, I cannot agree more. But Professor Son, many are pointing out to stability and high income as main reasons for choosing the job as a doctor. But some say this is because the absolute number of doctors is low compared to other countries. And according to OECD data, the number of clinical doctors for every 1,000 people was 2.6 as of 2021, which falls short of the OECD average. But how are doctors viewing this data?
Yeah, I have to say my opinions are not a reflection of all of the doctors in the community. So, but just to say, I think most people, our community agrees that there is a shortage of doctors. But the other thing that we need to consider is the indicator that we're using to compare with other countries is just an average, and we shouldn't be falling in the traps of the average. There's a lot of focus on doctors being centralized in Seoul, and the other indicators that we have for health outcomes, such as life expectancy, is one of the highest amongst the OECD countries. And we have to also consider the fact that our country has the most highest healthcare utilization rates. So there's a lot of issue at play, not just the number of doctors per 1,000 population. But when you combine all of these things, I think our system is performing really well compared to other countries, despite the number of doctors. But then the number of people utilizing health services being highest means that we're doctors are being demanded a lot. So there's a lot of workload issues for physicians as well as anyone in the healthcare system. So we need to be really considerate of these dichotomies and discrepancies of these indicators. So in short, I think there is a shortage, but we also have to factor all other considerations so that we pick the right people and then really think about how much we need to adjust to address the shortage issue.
All right, I see. Well, I totally understand that there could be unique characteristics that South Korea only has. But Dr. Tan, I think there is a consensus that the number of doctors in essential fields is too low. Could you tell us why some medical fields are more popular than others?
Well, one reason is because doctors are choosing to go into potentially more lucrative medical fields with a lower exposure to medical liability. For example, and then they're also thinking about prospects of jobs after training. For example, if a doctor is considering, say, the field of pediatrics, now South Korea famously has the lowest fertility rate of all OECD countries. People simply are not having babies as much as they did, say, a decade ago or 50 years ago. So your prospects of being employed after training, say in pediatrics or obstetrics, is lower, and that's a reality that some doctors are considering. Also, the reimbursement scheme may make certain fields less attractive. And so a doctor may prefer, instead of, say, if they trained in neurosurgery, instead of performing brain surgery, which is a high-risk procedure which can only be performed in specialized medical centers in metropolitan regions, they may decide to do something such as pain medicine, which is lower risk, and also you don't have to worry about reimbursement through national health insurance. Patients are often paying out of pocket for these services. So there are a lot of push and pull factors in terms of what is driving doctors towards certain certain fields, specialties within the medical profession. And of course, then this is causing, in some areas, deficiency of doctors who are trained in the essential fields in particularly rural areas. And so I don't know that it's necessarily a quantity issue in terms of an absolute shortage of doctors. It seems more like a distributive issue in terms of where our doctors are located. You know, is it in the metropolitan area versus the rural areas, the provinces, and then also which fields are the doctors concentrated in? Are they in more lucrative, out-of-pocket fields that they can charge for procedures that are not covered by national health insurance, or are they stuck within a reimbursement scheme that doesn't reward doctors for, say, more sophisticated high-risk procedures?
Right, I see. So it seems there are some of the aspects that are making students to choose certain departments. I see. Well, Professor Son, another major issue is the exodus of doctors to Seoul. According to the data, less than 2 doctors per 1,000 people are staying in provincial areas. How serious is this shortage of doctors?
Yeah, I think Dr. Tan pointed out this issue in her response as well. It's pretty serious, but also we have to think about the laws of supply and demand. The 1/4 of the population lives in metropolitan Seoul and vicinity regions in Gyeonggi province, and there naturally is more demand for health services there. Also, there's a lot more infrastructure and training opportunities in these areas compared to rural and other regions of Korea. So there's an exodus of many physicians and medical professionals wanting to live and train in Seoul. It's the very similar trend of any other professional fields in Korea that's being very centralized to Seoul, and I think this is just not just the problem of our medical field. It's somewhat following the structure of all of our economy, political, and administrative systems that we have here in Korea. So it's hard to say that this is something that we could solve with some sort of different rules and regulations and programs, but I think it's just it's definitely creating a huge problem for quality of service and service coverage in rural areas, and we really definitely have to think about more comprehensive approach to address this problem.
All right, I see your point. Well, considering all of this, and given that the demand for medical services will only continue to soar due to South Korea's aging society, the government showed its willingness to increase the quota for medical school admissions. And the question is the size of the increase, though our Dr. Tan already pointed out that this is not just a matter of quantity. But Dr. Tan, how is the discussion of this increase developing now?
Right. I was just at a meeting of my medical school where I graduated this last weekend, and this topic did come up. And I know that at my medical school, they are already planning for increasing the size of the incoming class. I think it's in a few years by 50 students. And so they are working with the government to try to increase the numbers of incoming medical students. But as I said, just because we have a higher number of doctors, I don't think that necessarily means that the problems will be solved, because the problem is a distributive problem. So again, if we have, instead of 100 doctors, 150 doctors, but they all decide that they are going to live and work in Seoul, and they all decide that they are not going to go into essential services, we're basically right back where we started. And so we do need to look at this problem comprehensively. We need to figure out why. Why is there an exodus from the rural regions and the provinces, and start with more of a root cause analysis in terms of what's going on with the demographics as well. But then also we can look abroad and see, we're not the first country to face this kind of problem. There are countries that started healthcare workforce teams where there's a specific agency that addresses the paucity of doctors in rural areas. And so they have teams in place where it's either doctors in training or doctors who have just finished their specialty training. They may be required to do 3 or 4 years of service in a rural area before they are licensed to practice independently. I think one difference, though, is that in some countries, such as the UK or Australia, sometimes doctors are considered part of the public or government employee workforce. And so it's a little bit easier in terms of human resource management from a government perspective. Here in Korea, even though we have national health insurance, the vast majority of doctors are in private practice. And so in this situation, you have to look in terms of, how can we incentivize doctors to work in the provincial areas? And in terms of accessibility, what sort of technologies can we use to provide access to people in rural areas to high quality medical care? Certain solutions can include telemedicine, for example, wearable monitoring devices, in-home healthcare that people can access. There is a whole range of medical solutions that we need to be creative and consider when we're tackling this very, very complex issue. It's not just increasing the numbers alone, that I don't think that's going to be the fix-all for this very complicated problem.
Right, I cannot agree more. And as our Dr. Tennis keeps saying, increasing the whole enrollment quota may not be enough to tackle this issue. And so there must be some additional measures taken place. Well, first of all, Professor Yoon, doctors say the government needs to boost compensation for those working in essential medical fields. What is this about?
Yeah, Dr. Ten also highlighted this earlier. The medical reimbursement schemes for fee-for-service, certain fees that are covered for basic practices or follow-up visits, these are really low compared to any other OECD countries. So, and doctors are being incentivized to look at other services like dermatologies or things that are not covered through national health insurance, so that they have a bit more of a convoluted practice to generate income. What I want to just say is that amongst the OECD countries, doctors in Korea actually are well compensated, and even for and even after adjusting for purchasing power, actually when you adjust for purchasing power, Korea ranks one of the highest. So I don't think it's just about doctors being well compensated. I think it's just a lot of systems issue, also an issue of a workload. And as I mentioned earlier, I think the workload issue is not just about number of doctors, but also number of clinical visits that people are making on average. Korea has highest number of care-seeking visits per year. By large, it's we're one of the top 2 countries. So when patients are seeking a lot of care, it just naturally creates a lot of workload and burden for doctors in general. Let me also mention that this medical professions and healthcare system and health for all is not just about doctors. Doctors are one part of the equation, and they are important. There are nursing workforce and other workforces that supports the doctors that are really essential and important. And there's significant shortages for them, and they're underpaid, less appreciated. And I think all of these supporting casting systems needs to be also looked at. So it's the focusing the discussion on doctors is important, but we have to look at this more holistically.
All right, I see. So it seems that it's quite necessary to go over systems and workload issues along with reimbursement scheme as well. Now, Dr. Tan, another suggestion to increase the number of those working in essential services is coming up with a law to prevent doctors from being embroiled in medical suits. Is this among the major issues doctors in essential fields are currently facing?
Certainly, doctors are concerned about decreasing their exposure to medical liability, but primarily the way that doctors do this is through adhering to practice guidelines, ethical guidelines, safety guidelines. Tort law reform can place caps on punitive damages in medical liability cases. This is something that can be considered, and in the United States, states that enacted tort law reform related to medical liability, they did see a decrease in the number of frivolous lawsuits brought against doctors. And so this is a consideration in terms of making the practice of medicine less focused on defensive medicine and instead concentrating more on providing high quality, safe care without the worry of the risk of medical liability.
All right, I see. Well, we keep discussing many other possible options that we can think of to tackle this issue. And now, Professor Son, to make sure doctors stay in rural regions. Experts say it is necessary to select local students from those very regions to fill medical school quotas. What is your view on this?
Yeah, I think it's one of the nice ideas, how that gets put into practice and in reality what will happen. Forcing people to stay because you're born there is not the most ideal way of doing it. there will be people who wanting to move out. There will be people who wanted to stay. Giving scholarships and admitting students from the local regions and mandating them to stay for X number of years in the region would definitely solve the problem temporarily. It's certainly not going to solve the problem permanently. I think there's a lot of other things at play, as I mentioned earlier, care seeking, the centralization of many of the things in Korea are to Seoul location, training programs, all of these things are really, really at play. So partly will solve the problem temporarily again, but certainly we have to come up with a more holistic approach to think about how we would address the training problems when there's less servicemen, less people coming, and less specialization practice that's being available in rural regions. Again, it's you got to train the doctors, and it takes a long time to produce a really well-trained doctors, right, in internal medicine, any other specialties. And it's not just about forcing them to stay in rural regions.
Right. We do need to come up with a holistic approach, like our Professor Sohn said, considering the capital concentration this country is, going through right now. Well, Dr. Tan, experts also emphasize the need to significantly increase government support for regional and regional national hospitals. Do you also see the need for such a measure?
I do. I do agree with this because I think there's a need to strengthen the capacities of regional healthcare centers. There are some rural areas, island regions, some places where people simply cannot access potentially life-saving medical care because they're missing the so-called golden time, say after a stroke or after a heart attack, because of lack of healthcare facilities that have the proper capacity and staff to provide that essential life-saving care. And this is really a tragedy, I think. So I think there needs to be an emphasis on improving the capacities of regional healthcare centers. Another example would be to provide cancer care in these regional healthcare centers. So a patient could perhaps receive their initial care in the metropolitan region, but then if they need subsequent, say, infusions of chemotherapy, they don't necessarily have to get on the train and travel for 2-3 hours just to get infusions of chemotherapy. If there is a regional cancer center of excellence near their home, they can continue their cancer care there. The important thing, though, is to have a well-functioning network, healthcare network, so that patients feel connected and that they understand that their care is well coordinated and seamless. So even if they go to their regional healthcare center, they feel confident that they are receiving high quality care, that they don't need to travel to the metropolitan areas, that really is not a necessity for them, that they can receive the care that they need in a much more accessible location.
Right, I see. So more support is needed for better healthcare network. Thank you, Dr. Tan. Well, this, I believe, would be our last question. So I'd like to ask our Professor Sohn. We have been seeing clashes between the government and doctors over this very issue. How should it be dealt with, in your opinion?
Yeah, it's a tough question. I think each side has their own opinions and also difficulties and priorities. I think there needs to be a lot of discussions and talks and planning. This problem is not going to be solved in months' time or even a couple of years. It needs to be, as we mentioned earlier through the discussion, there needs to be a bit of holistic approach. We need to be thoughtful of other healthcare professionals around us. There needs to be a step-by-step approach. I think what's important is that this should not be a political agenda. It's always been a political agenda, and when there's new political system and parties come into play, it's always their priority, but then there's a different agenda on plate. And there's a lot of, also within the doctors, there's a lot of disparities and disagreements. So I think we just need to find a way to talk to each other, share different perspectives, and make sure that we are able to accommodate and understand different perspectives. I think we've been failing in that regard. So just yelling and telling that there's a problem, there's a shortage, there's a workload issues. I think it's not just the doctors that there's this problem. We have to be mindful for others and others around. And what we have to focus is that it's not just the doctors, it's actually people around us that needs care, that needs to be focused. We always forget that in this discussion, where we are trying to do this for people in our country who needs help, and for the better health of our citizens. So when we forget that, it becomes a dispute.
Right.
So we should never forget that important issue.
Right, I cannot agree more that this cannot be political agenda, and hopefully discussions can lead to a positive outcome. Well, thank you, Dr. Tan and Professor Son, for your insights and time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's all for Within the Frame tonight. We'll be back tomorrow with more in-depth stories. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.
해외에서 경기가 있을 때마다 스스로 다짐하는 말이 있어요. 나는 대한민국을 대표하는 선수이기 전에 대한민국 국민이다. 해외에서 자부심을 갖는 가장 좋은 방법은 재외선거를 놓치지 않는 거죠. 인터넷으로 쉽고 간편하게 신고 신청할 수 있는 제22대 국회의원 재외선거